Hello and welcome to Fabula Celtica, a Celtic Studies podcast.
With Tyler Baxter
And Kevin Collins.
Series 1, Ancient Ireland. Episode 2, Catching the Sun.
Welcome back to episode 2 of
Fabula Celtica. I'm Tyler Baxter.
And I'm Kevin Collins. Tyler, what have you got in store for us today?
Well, last time I promised that we were going to talk about the Neolithic tombs of Newgrange and of Boyne, the Boyne Valley complex. And I want to start with a question for you. Let's see if you can get this one. If I talk about the she, S01, what comes to mind?
Oh, butter.
Oh, okay, great. Anything else? Anything more fantastical?
I could only give you another full guess, so do take me out of my misery.
For those of you who are listening in, if you've been delving into Celtic mythology yourself before, into Celtic folklore, you've probably heard of this term she in reference to the Irish fairies or in reference to the Irish Otherworld. The Old Irish term is sheath, or plural sheatha, and it's usually translated into English as something like fairy hill or elf mound or even hollow hill. And that hollow hill variation is particularly apt because we are going to be talking about passage tombs, which are quite literally hollow hills. And they do indeed become associated with fairies and other folkloric magical stories and ideas as time goes on. So just to really hammer in this term, sheath in Old Irish can refer to a hill with sort of this connotation of supernatural residence. It can also be a general term for the Irish Otherworld, which is sort of a parallel dimension to ours, where the fairies and other sort of supernatural creatures live. It can mean the underworld in sort of a similar sense, or it can even mean peace, actually. And so sometimes this is used as sort of a play on words in certain texts, especially ones with Christian elements to them. But Newgrange itself, in the older medieval texts, is called sheath and broga, which is the she of the dwelling, really. Dwelling as in sort of a landholding or a mansion or some sort of residence. So it's a residence of supernatural beings. With that all being said, the most famous of the supernatural beings in the mythological sources, who are sort of counterparts to the Fovra that we mentioned in the last episode, those strange one-armed, one-legged people who attacked Partholon during his taking, the ones that might be more familiar to people are known as the Tuatha De Danann, or Tuatha De Danann in sort of the modern Irish pronunciations. It would be Tuatha De Danann in the Old Irish, but these are it's usually translated as the tribe or the people of Danu. Danu supposedly being some sort of goddess who we don't know a whole lot about, but they're actually the fifth takers of Ireland in the Lever Gavala. So we're going a little out of sequence to introduce them now because they come into today's story about the Newgrange monument.
We'll circle back for the third and fourth.
We will indeed, yes. We will be looking at the third, fourth, and the fifth takings in episode 3.
Okay.
But for now, just be aware that the Tuatha De Danann, I'm going to use the Old Irish pronunciation because that's what I'm used to, but the people of the goddess Danu are a supernatural race of people who, after a certain point in the mythology, are typically seen as the inhabitants of the Sheatha, of these hollow hills, and of the Otherworld.
Does your belief for the Irish mythology of fairies and elves, does that stay true today?
I think it's evolved today. There's sort of a transition from the mythology. But
you personally, do you have a supernatural belief?
I like to entertain the idea. I wouldn't say I believe it, but I don't disbelieve anything either necessarily.
Another concrete answer.
Well, yeah, I would say the interesting thing to me is the stories themselves and how people respond to them, rather than whether or not they're true. which is oftentimes the kind of answer you'll get from a lot of folklorists, for instance.
From an academia.
Well, yes, I suppose from academics as well, you may get that answer. Though I'm sure there are plenty of academics who will say, yes, they believe, or no, they absolutely don't. It will vary, but folklorists will definitely be more ambivalent most of the time from the folklorists that I've followed in the past.
And before I let you move on, aliens?
I don't know. Maybe the Tuatha De Danann are aliens.
Oh, maybe they are?
In the text says they come from the north. Maybe they meant from above rather than from north. Moving along here, I'm going to tell you a little story, and I had to set up that bit about what the Sídha are in order for it to make sense, and who the Tuatha De Danann are. In a text known as Tochmarc Éideanna, or the Wooing of Étaín, which is recorded in the Yellow Book of Lecan, which is a 14th and 15th century composite manuscript, as well as in Lever na Hydra, or the Book of the Dun Cow, which is our oldest extant manuscript that's primarily in Irish, dated to about 1106, or pre-1106, I should say, with some later additions. We're told the story of the Dagda and Boyne. And the Dagda is one of the main, most important leaders of the Tuatha De Danann. That's the supernatural race. His name means the good god, and he has all sorts of land-shaping powers and other abilities. He's often depicted as having a large club and a rather large stomach. He can eat a lot. He's also oftentimes depicted or implied to be a giant. And the Dagda comes and visits Newgrange, visits the Brúna Boyne complex. And this is the dwelling of Elchvar, who is the lord of the sheath at Newgrange. And Elchvar has a wife named Boyne, who the Dagda is like, I want some of that. And Bowen's looking at the Dagda like, he's not too bad. So the Dagda and Boyne conspire together. Boyne sends her husband Elchvar off on a errand that's supposed to only take one day. But after Elchvar leaves, the Dagda uses his great supernatural powers to stop the course of the sun in the sky and make this one day last for 9 months. And he also causes it so Elchvar doesn't really feel the passage of time, like keeping hunger away from him and keeping tiredness away from him, so that Elchvar thinks that he's off on a one-day errand, but he actually ends up being gone for 9 months, giving the Dagda and Boyne plenty of time to have a good time together and also to conceive and birth a child.
Oh, well-placed 9 months.
Indeed. And so the child that they have is quite a famous figure among the Tuatha De Danann. His name is Oingus, or also he's known as the Mac-Og, the young son. His name, Oingus, means one desire. He's also called the Mac-Og because young is the son who is born in a day. And this idea that the Dagda stops the sun in the sky is going to tie into our discussion of the Newgrange passage tomb, which has an element of solar alignment to it. So there may be some echoes of a cultural memory of the actual construction and original usages of Newgrange within this medieval tale. This is also a really good point at which to introduce the idea of Dindshenchas, which is a term that I'm going to bring up again and again because it is a very frequent element within Irish stories.
What is it?
Dindshenchas. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Irish, this is going to sound really strange, but I'm going to spell it out for you just so you can picture it in your head. Dindshenchas. And it's a compound word. The Shenachas part of it, the second element, means lore, or sort of a traditional body of knowledge. And the din part of it means a notable place. So it's the lore of notable places. There are certain texts that are considered just in and of themselves, their genre is Dindshenchas, and basically the whole point of the text are usually quite short. There are both prose and verse Dindshenchas. But they basically give the explanation for how a place came to acquire its name or how it came to be like it is in sort of its physical attributes. There are also frequently Dindshenchas elements slipped into longer stories such as sagas. I've been recently reading the Ton Bocunya from the Ulster cycle, the cattle raid of Cooley, and there's a ton of Dindshenchas tales sprinkled throughout this much larger text that's mostly about war between Connacht and Ulster. The Dindshenchas basically retells this story I just told you and adds an additional bit to it. And I'm going to read a subsection of this longer Dindshenchas poem from Edward Gwynn's translation of his Metrical Dindshenchas, volume 3. So here goes. The poem is titled Boyne II. Thither from the south came Boyne, wife of Nectin, to the love tryst, to the house of Elkvar, lord of horses, a man that gave many a good judgment. Thither came by chance the Dagda into the house of famous Elkvar. He fell to importuning the woman. He brought her to the birth in a single day. It was then they made the sun stand still to the end of 9 months, strange the tale, warming the noble fine grass in the roof of the perfect firmament. Then said the woman here, Union with thee, that was my one desire, and Oingus shall be the boy's name, said the Dagda in noble wise. Boyne went from the house in haste to see if she could reach the well. She was sure of hiding her guilt if she could attain to bathe in it. The Druids' 3 cupbearers, Flesk and Lesk and Luav, Nectin MacNavid, set to watch his farewell. To them came gentle Boyne toward the well in sooth. Then strong fountain rose over her and drowned her finally. So in the first 4 stanzas of this poem, we basically have a summary of the story I just told, but then it sort of adds an extra bit to it. It says that Boyne, the wife of Elkvar, goes to Nectin's well in order to bathe in it and purify herself so that her husband won't discover her infidelity. But this well is guarded by these 3 cupbearers.
And her birth.
Well, the birth is hidden by fostering Oingus to another sheath. So that's in another, or actually it's in a continuation of the Wooing of Étaín, which we will come back to in the future. But Oingus is basically adopted out, more or less. You can think of that for now. So Elkvar doesn't know about that part. But Bowen's still concerned that she's somehow going to get found out because she's unclean or something. So she goes to bathe in this well. But what happens is that when she gets there, the well essentially rises up and drowns her. And she becomes the river Boyne. So Boyne becomes the Boyne. That's where we get the name of the river in the first place, at least according to this text. So the river Boyne is actually the goddess Boyne. And so there's an example of Dindshenchas. This is an example of the lore of notable places, and it is a Dindshenchas about the Boyne River.
Are there many Dindshenchas?
So there are easily hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of Dindshenchas that we still have preserved to this day.
It's nice to know the lore of places.
And we'll actually see a very, very similar Dindshenchas to this later, several episodes down the line. It's not coming up right away, but something very similar happens. A different female character goes to a well for a different reason, but the end result is the same. The well rises up, drowns her, and she becomes a different river. So it's again, we've seen sort of different motifs that are repeated throughout the tradition, much like we saw in the last episode with Fintan MacBocra and Tuan MacCarroll, both being the sole survivors of their individual takings and both living by reincarnating for centuries after so that they could pass on their knowledge to the Christian people who followed them. So with that all being said, let's go ahead and look at the actual archaeology of the Bruna Boyne complex. Let's talk about passage tombs, since I kind of left that one as very rough on the details in the last episode. And let's see how the passage tomb of Newgrange specifically, let's see how that ties into the story of the Dagda stopping the sun in the sky. So passage tombs in general, as we mentioned last time, were built pretty much through the entirety of the Neolithic period. And they consist, as their name would indicate, of a passage into a larger chamber. They're typically covered with a circular mound made of a mixture of stone and earth. So you get that cairn built first with the loose stone. Then on top of the cairn, you get a mound of earth and oftentimes turf placed over that, creating that nice sort of grassy mound appearance. And they vary in size quite drastically. The typical passage tomb size ranges from about 10 to 25 meters in diameter. But at the largest, you get up to 85 meters in diameter. Wow. And we're talking on that larger end when we're talking about the Boyne complex and the three major passage tombs that are in that location. Newgrange being the most famous, but we also have the passage tombs of Nowth and Dowth.
Just out of interest, there must have been a good knowledge of astrology in order to, orientate and build these in such a way.
Yes. And it's hard to say exactly how these people knew the things about astrology that they did, but as we'll see when we're talking about the structure of the Newgrange passage tomb, they clearly had a very precise knowledge of certain solar events. But how they attained that knowledge, how they calculated it, hard to say.
Where were we with farming utensils at this time when this was being constructed?
So we're still in the Neolithic, so we haven't yet really moved on to much in the way of metal utensils. They would have been using, probably wooden plows.
Quite a dichotomy of using like rudimental instruments but being quite au fait with astrology. There's a large gap in the middle.
I mean, to some extent, I suppose. I guess it could show what was important to them at this time.
Do you think there was anything supernatural or divine about their knowledge of astrology, or do you think it was just from observing the night sky?
I certainly think there is a spiritual element to why they cared. There's also a very practical element of the idea of the cycle of seasons being so entwined with agriculture and the agricultural cycle. You really need to be aware of the passing of seasons and how that affects the whole process of growing and harvesting crops. So there's that practical element. But the fact that we get solar alignment with a number of passage tombs, not just Newgrange, but we get these solar alignments at a place of burial, and a very elaborate place of burial in the case of the whole Boyne complex, suggests that there is an important element of ritual, ceremony, religion tied in with it as well. These passage tombs are oftentimes built at hilltop locations. They're not built on low-lying ground so that you can see quite a bit around them, and the mound's going to be larger than the hill they originally built it on. That passage tomb is not, dug into a natural hill. It's built on top of an artificial structure. They're usually built on elevated ground in the first place. And they can occur in groups, as they do in the Boyne complex, including what we call satellite tombs, which we see at the passage tomb of Nowth. It's this very large. It's actually the largest of the three in the Boyne complex. This is the 85-meter diameter passage tomb, and it's surrounded by a whole bunch of smaller, more on the 10-meter side passage tombs that are literally right next to and encircling it.
The passage element, is that like the passage of light?
Well, in the case of Newgrange, yes. In the case of a general passage tomb, I would say not. But for the ones that are solarly aligned, yes, indeed. So the passages for a passage tomb vary quite a bit in how long they are. They can be as short as 1 meter to qualify as a passage tomb. They can be as long as 40 meters, which is the case at Nowth. So Nowth, you go very deep into this burial mound in order to get to the chamber in the center. Once you get
40 meters in and 85 meters wide then in the chamber.
So it's pretty much in the dead center where that one goes into. The Newgrange passage is not quite as long. It doesn't actually go all the way into the center of the mound. The general construction of these, just to try to give you all a visual, is that you would create your passage, however long it is. It's going to vary from about 1.2 meters in width down the passage to as much as 6.5 meters in width. So it can be quite a sizable spacey passage. And the passage itself will be formed with upright stone slabs, which are called orthostats, topped either with flat stone slabs, which are called lintels, or topped with a technique of corbelline, which is sort of a back and forth stacking, sort of like we do bricks and walls. They're not all perfectly aligned with each other. You kind of offset them. So you offset them as you go in closer and closer together until they kind of come together at sort of a peak is the best way I can describe it in audio format. It might be worth it for listeners to take a quick Google search of the roof or the ceiling, I should say, at Newgrange, and you can get a really nice image of what the top looks like, and you can get an idea of what that corbelline looks like if you just do a quick Google search of that. That sort of goes into the point where you get to the chamber, which is usually cruciform in shape. So if you imagine a cross, the long part of the cross is the passage itself, and then the tip and the two little horizontal bits of the cross, those are the recesses in the chamber. So that's the typical shape, though we do have a handful of passage tombs where there are more chambers than 3. There's one at Loughcrew in County Meath that has 7 chambers. I suppose I should mention that the Bruna Boyne complex is also in County Meath. Newgrange itself and the other passage tombs in this immediate area are older than the Egyptian pyramids.
When do the pyramids date from?
The oldest one, I believe, is 3,700 BCE.
So they're almost over 1,000 years predating them, even more.
A few hundred years, anyway.
A few hundred years. Sorry, my maths is shaky at the best of times.
Yeah. So we have Newgrange, which is a really stunning piece of architecture. It's been restored from what it was sort of rediscovered as in the early 1900s, when it pretty much just looked like a hill with a handful of standing stones outside of it. It was all overgrown with trees. It was not clear that there was any sort of entrance to it, but it was excavated by O'Kelly in the early 1900s. And he uncovered the entrance and this very significant part of the architecture known as the roof box, which we'll come back to in a second. And since that time, there has also been excavation at Dowth. And Dowth was actually excavated prior to either. It was excavated in the mid-19th century. But unfortunately, those darn Victorian era wannabe archaeologists decided that it was a great idea to go into Dowth directly from the top of the mound, and they managed to collapse it. So now the poor thing looks like a giant crater rather than a mound, which is a little ironic considering the story of Dowth that we'll look at the end of this episode. Newgrange, as it stands today, again, this is something that's worth taking a quick look online to see a picture of it, but I'll try to paint a word picture for you. Actually, Kevin, have you been to Newgrange?
I'm afraid I haven't.
You have not? Oh, that's a shame.
To the best of my knowledge, you couldn't get a taxi there either.
Oh, yeah, well, you can get a taxi there if you leave from the right spot. Just don't go from Slane. At least not during the summer months.
I guess you've been there a different time, though, have you?
I have. I actually went for the second time very recently. My friend was visiting from the Seattle area. He flew into Dublin, and we went out to Newgrange together. When it was excavated, there are all these white stones that fell out, quartz mostly, that seemed like they had originally formed a wall. So what the people who excavated the site did is they reconstructed what they thought the wall originally would have looked like on Newgrange, and they left the loose white stones just to stay where they fell at Dowth. So if you go and visit the Brúna Boyne complex, you can visit both Dowth and Newgrange, and you can see that contrast between where they just kind of let things fall as they were versus they did this active reconstruction. The result of the reconstruction is some amount of guesswork, but it's guesswork with a good degree of confidence behind it, and it really creates this stunning, very white wall that goes around about half of the Newgrange mound, which makes it very visible from quite a distance. And this would have probably been an intentional idea, much like the pyramids of Egypt were originally capped with marble to make them really stand out, and then people came and chipped off the marble and stole it. But similar idea here. It would make it very visible. It would make it a site of gathering. Likely, it would make it easy to get to from a few miles away because you'd be able to see it from its elevated position and with this white, very visible wall. I can say that the excavation was only a small portion of the mound was excavated, so they didn't really do much in terms of going into the mound itself. It was mostly sort of around the edges of the mound to get out this material that they rebuilt the wall with to expose what are called the curbstones, which are these lovely, at least in the case of Newgrange, these lovely decorated, very large stones that surround the whole base and kind of help hold the earthen mound in place. It's essentially a retaining wall. And then, of course, the entrance to Newgrange, which includes the passage. And then above the passage, there is this little sort of window-looking thing that we call the roof box, just above the upper lintel of the passage proper. It measures about 1 meter by about a quarter meter. And it was very intentionally put there because on the winter solstice, when the sun rises, assuming that weather is allowing, the sunlight will go not through the entrance of the passage tomb, but through the roof box specifically, and will go all the way back into the chamber.
Is there something that it hits at the back of the chamber?
Well, it more or less it kind of will fan out on the floor of the chamber, and makes it back to basically the recess that's directly opposite the passage. We're talking about a 19-meter length passage that this light has to go through, and the passage is not perfectly straight from the opening. The passage actually gets higher as you go from where you start, so you can't really tell when you're actually walking down the passage, which you can do if you visit Newgrange today and make sure you book in advance. But when you go in, you actually walk uphill. And so the roof box has to be set above the original passage in order for the light to come in straight and get into the passage itself. It comes across the floor. It's quite a thin little sort of triangle that it thins down to as it goes far into the passage, and it pretty much reaches the back recess, and it's this kind of nice golden sunlight colored band across the floor. It does not illuminate it to an incredible degree, but it's very sort of atmospheric. The guide, if you go, will recreate it for you using electronic lights that have been set up for that purpose. But to actually go and see it on the solstice itself, and it's the true sunlight doing it, requires entering a lottery that's something like a 5-year wait, even if you manage to get it. So it's quite competitive. There's only space for about a dozen people inside the chamber. Kevin, does this idea of sunlight remind you of anything from earlier in the episode?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that idea that the Dagda stops the sun in the sky from the Wooing of Étaín, some scholars have speculated that there may be sort of a lingering cultural memory. The Newgrange mound, the entrance would have been obscured as the mound sort of expanded under, rainfall, the passage of time, and spilled over the entrance, spilled over the curbstones and the wall, so that it just looked like a regular hill. And by the medieval period, it would have been hard to tell that there was much there at all. Somehow, this story of capturing the sun managed to survive into the medieval period and seems perhaps to be connected to this idea of architecture. Now, that's further supported by a couple of other archaeological elements at the Brúna Boyne complex. At Newgrange itself, in addition to the roof box, at the very opposite side of that, on the back of the mound, there is a curbstone, and I mentioned all these curbstones are decorated. The curbstone at the entrance in front of the passage inside has the famous triskel pattern. It's sort of 3 integrated swirls that shows up on a lot of
like a triskelion.
It shows up, in lots of tourist shops, sort of spread across all the different quote unquote Celtic countries. I saw lots of that pattern in Brittany, for instance. But it's actually, in terms of its original appearances, it's just at Newgrange. It's not a pan-Celtic design. It is specifically at Newgrange, and it appears twice. It appears once on this curbstone in front, and there is another one inside the chamber that's opposite the passage.
What do the triskelions represent?
We have no idea. But the curbstone that I want to mention at the opposite side of the mound, at the back of the mound, has a vertical line down it that seems to match up exactly with the sun set on the solstice, the winter solstice. So the mound tracks not only the sunrise, but also the sunset all the way across that day. Additionally, at Dowth, one of the other passage tombs, Newgrange is about 80 meters in diameter. Dowth is slightly bigger.
Just as an aside.
Yeah.
Maybe not your area of expertise, but
sure.
With the shifting orbit of Earth, will there be a time where the sun no longer shines through Newgrange?
Probably eventually. This is, as you said, not my area of expertise, but... it's still going strong today, so I would assume it will take a few thousand years more before that point occurs.
Okay, well, I better enter that lotto.
Yeah. It's you want to do it sooner rather than later. At Dowth, one of the curbstones there has a pattern that many people have speculated is representing solar alignment in some fashion. It looks actually quite like a modern sundial on part of it, and then another part of it that sort of goes around that sort of curve of the sundial looks like it might represent, for instance, the phases of the moon. So there's another potential sundial, lunar calendar, something like that that's depicted at a curbstone at Dowth.
At what point in history did Newgrange become desolate? I mean, it was excavated by O'Kelly in this as recently as the 70s.
Yeah.
And so there was a period there where its history was lost.
Yeah, it seems like there's been some sort of in and out of whether or not the entrance is exposed. If I remember correctly, there was a period of time in, I think, the 1700s where it was open, and people were able to get in, and actually most of the grave goods that were originally in there weren't in there when it was properly excavated by O'Kelly, because it had been raided essentially by whoever. But I'm not sure. I don't think we have a date for when it was sort of closed off, but we think it was closed off during the medieval period. How it opened up again, we don't really know. But maybe there was sort of some off and on times that it was open and people were aware of it. But certainly as far as being this grand structure with this white wall that you could see from miles around, that would have been certainly no longer clearly visible by the medieval period when we first get written records. This leads us to one other story that ties into this idea of solar alignment, and actually, again, echoes this motif that we saw in that extract from the Wooing of Étaín. And this is another Dindshenchas tale.
Oh, good.
Yes.
I like the Dindshenchas tales.
They are lovely things. Sometimes they're very wild things. This is a Dindshenchas tale about Dowth, the third passage tomb in the complex, the one that unfortunately now looks more like a crater because of a botched excavation attempt. You can visit Dowth today as well, but it's not part of the official tour. You have to drive around to it yourself. I have actually not done that myself yet, but it's actually got some trees and things growing on and around it. It's not as well kept up, and it's blocked off. You can't go inside, of course, because it's been collapsed. But it's still worth looking at some maybe aerial images of. It's kind of cool with how it looks, even though it's also kind of sad that it's rather collapsed. And it's actually also has a solar alignment. I believe, I can't remember which solar alignment it has. I think it's with an equinox. But in any case, the Dindshenchas tells the story of King Bressil Bodivith, whose epithet Bodivith means something like the darkening of cows, or perhaps the extinction of cows, which is appropriate given that it's told that during his reign a cattle plague killed all the cows in Ireland except for 7 of them. And so
I knew that this story was missing death on a large scale up till now.
Yeah. So we've got some death now, death of cows specifically, but mass death of cows. We'll see how important cattle were as we move along, especially into the medieval period. Bowen's name, by the way, the woman who gives her name to the River Boyne, her name also seems to have something to do with cows. That bow aspect of it means cow. In any case, King Bressil wanted to build a tower to reach heaven. That should sound familiar. We recapped last episode some important tales from the Book of Genesis.
Babel,
indeed. Yes, he wanted to mimic the Tower of Nimrod, it says, but Tower of Babel, same difference. And build a tower that would reach heaven. So he enlists some laborers to start building this tower for him. But the laborers only agree to work for him for 1 day. So what do you think he does?
He extends the day to 9 months, the same way that he had...
More or less, yeah. His plan is basically to extend the day as long as he needs to until the tower is built to his satisfaction.
Right, because they're not having a kid, so it doesn't need to be 9 months for the gestation period.
Right.
Just however long it takes to build the mythical tower.
Exactly. So Bressil doesn't have the power to do this himself. He's just a king. Kings are politically powerful, but not necessarily magical powerful. Conveniently, though, his sister is a druidess, and she has powerful magic. So she stops the sun in the sky for him, and his laborers get to work. Now, the next part's a little uncomfortable. We're going to have to take this episode as explicit as we'll have to for many, because the old Irish tales are not necessarily terribly kid-friendly. So if you're listening with children, maybe cut this part for them. For some reason, unexplained, Bressil is watching his sister work her magic, and he decides, I'm going to go sleep with my sister. It's not clear whether this is consensual, whether it is rape, but in whatever the reason, whether because of the sinful act or because she's distracted, his sister's magic fails and the sun sets and the workers go home. And what they managed to build during the time before King Bressil let his pants control his mind, was what we have of Dowth. So he did not get very high at all with the tower he was trying to build. It just ends up being a sizable mound, but a mound nonetheless.
Is there a moral to the story?
I mean, I guess if there's any moralizing, it's that don't sleep with your sister. Yeah, I mean, maybe there is a metaphor implied of how well endowed you will be, depending on who you sleep with, perhaps. In any case, And it's quite ironic that the tower or the mound actually got shorter later on with this Bart's archaeological experiment. The last really main thing that I want to mention about the Newgrange complex also ties into the story. While most of the remains at the Newgrange site were gone before it was excavated, we do have some remains from the site. I can't remember if they're from the Newgrange passage tomb or from Dowth or from one of the smaller passage tombs, but in any case, there are some human remains that were found that DNA analysis was done on. And the DNA analysis indicated that it was very, very likely that the parents of the remains that were found were brother and sister, or perhaps parent and child. So there's strong indications that there was actually, there were people who were the product of incest buried at this site. So again, there may be some cultural memory that survived within this Dindshenchas tale.
Wow. Did we know the perils of incest when this lore was? I thought it was just the royal family in the 21st century that we really became aware of the perils.
I actually, that's what I was kind of hoping you would say, is that incest tends to be something historically that happens within sort of elite groups. And the idea that we have such an elaborate set of passage tombs here, particularly large, particularly fancy. We've got all these wonderful carvings, both inside and outside of the Newgrange passage tomb, for instance, indicates that these were places built by and for people of very high status. So probably quite, and for lack of a better term, a rather inbred group of fancy people were sort of the ones who had the say about the construction of the site and its use.
And this is to keep the lineage pure?
Presumably. It's all really speculation beyond what the archaeology can tell us, and there's so many blanks that we have to fill in ourselves that it's hard to say. Such
an elaborate burial place, taking into account the astrology and the effort that went into building it. What when they were alive, let's say, what were they doing with their time and energy? And if they have an army of people to build these elaborate burial, what do they do for the time where they're alive?
Yeah, it's a good question. We don't really know whether these locations were used really just as tombs and not used otherwise. It seems quite possible, if not even more likely than not, that with the solar alignment of Newgrange that was actually entered at least once a year for witnessing this quite spectacular event of the sun coming through the roof box and illuminating the inner chamber. But we can't be sure that may have been really for the dead alone. It's hard to say. So we can really only speculate, but certainly they had the wealth and power to get these things built, which suggests that at least this group of elites was well secure in food and housing and all that sort.
And there's no more to be unearthed at Newgrange. We've uncovered the secrets.
Well, as I said, when the excavation was done by O'Kelly, only a small part of the mound was excavated, the actual mound itself, as opposed to sort of the exterior amount of the mound. So actually inside the mound proper, so I guess atop the stones that sort of form the passage and the chamber, you would have put a cairn involving, lots of small stones, and you would have put earth on top of that and turf on top of that. And it's quite possible that there are things left behind in there from the workers, from, food that was left, possibly artifacts that were lost or intentionally put in there that we haven't seen yet because we haven't excavated it.
Super. No doubt using some kind of more modern technology like earth-penetrating lasers, because they found a new tomb in the or a new chamber in the pyramids in the last kind of 5 years.
Yes. It seems like those keep propping up lately. So yeah, as technology evolves, hopefully some of that comes our way over here to Ireland, and we are able to use more of that ourselves.
Well, if I have confidence in anyone, I have confidence in the OPW. I'm sure they'll do their absolute best to unearth the mysteries that Newgrange hides.
Indeed, the Irish famously on top of things. All right, Kevin, that will do it for this episode. But next time we will be looking at the Bronze Age and Iron Age, and kind of introducing some of the most famous and important sites in terms of the mythology, known as the royal sites that were mostly constructed during the Iron Age.
Thank you for listening to Fabula Celtica
with Tyler Baxter
and Kevin Collins.
Please rate and subscribe and follow us at Fabula Celtica on Twitter, Instagram, or email us at fabulaceltica@gmail.com.